What's up, Steelers fans? Welcome back to another episode of Around the Burgh. I'm your host, Mitchell Wolf, here with my co-host, Shane Kubis. Shane, how you doing tonight?
Just kind of waiting for things to keep ramping up with Steelers and with the rest of the NFL. So just getting through it. Talk about what we can talk about.
I've got bad news for you, buddy. It's mid-June. We're not.
I know we're gonna be waiting for a while. Hey, at least I'm excited about the fact that I'm actually gonna be able to go to camp this year whenever it happens. Just because I'm back closer to where I live now, back in Latrobe, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, now I think they even announced the schedule, so you should have a good idea as to what days will be open for. I think they do a pretty good job of keeping most days open. So
pretty much all of them, for the most part.
That's always a plus. So today on this episode, we're gonna dive into some numbers about the Steelers' offenses of past years, and then kind of use it to try to kind of predict what we think the offense will look like in 2022. Right. And there's some comments from the coaches so far that I think will be interesting for doing that kind of prediction. But first, we'll dive into just some news and notes. So we talked a lot about the guys whose contracts are coming up. So we talked about Deontay Johnson showing up at OTAs. Obviously, there's the whole Stephon Tuitt thing. We also talked about Minka Fitzpatrick, who apparently is doing the kind of TJ Watt hold in during OTAs or minicamp or whatever, which that's kind of the strategy now because guys can get fined a lot for holding out. So basically you just go and you don't do team drills. You only do individual stuff to, keep yourself fresh, but you're not just sitting out, so,
right.
And which I think is, a fair strategy by him.
I mean, he saw what it did for TJ last year, theoretically. And I think for him, it's mostly just about staying healthy, keeping fresh, still, like you said, not completely being cold, and hoping that something gets worked out prior to the start of the season, like what they did for TJ.
Yeah, and I really think that's going to happen, especially now that, the Stephon Tuitt cleared up some immediate cap room, so that just gives them a little more flexibility in the very short term. Other stuff from camp that kind of came out. The other deal that I want to talk about is that Chris Boswell's deal is also up at the end of this year.
Yes.
And, he is in his early 30s. I want to say 32.
I think 30. If it's not 32, it's 31.
He is 31. So,
31,
so he'll be 32 at the end of his contract,
gotcha.
Which kickers, that's fine.
Not really a concern.
You can get at least one more long-term deal out of that. And, aside from that one season where he kind of had the kicker yips, if you will, he's been, definitely the second best kicker in the NFL easily.
Yeah, it's tough because, like you said, the kickers, realistically, minus something weird happening to him this year where it gives you pause, you can go ahead and commit to him for probably 3-4 more years minimum just to have him in the building and not have to worry about it pretty much. So that's something I expect to happen. I think it's just going to be about how much money does he actually end up getting, because we know the specialists, it kind of varies. I forget what Tucker's year per year average, but I'm assuming it's going to be at least close to that, if I had to guess.
Yeah, you got to think that he's going to be. You probably can't make the argument that he's going to be the highest paid kicker in the NFL.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Okay, so Tucker is currently on a, let's see, 4-year, $20 million contract that was signed in 2019.
Okay.
And I think they added.
Is he still the highest paid kicker?
I couldn't imagine he isn't. But
I assume. But
yeah. So that average is $5 million a year.
That's fine if for a guy like Boswell.
Yeah, I don't want to lose him $5 million a year. No problem.
Yeah, you don't want to lose that.
He is the number one paid kicker in the NFL.
Okay. All right.
Let me see. I just clicked out of that. Whoops.
That's what I would have thought.
He's the 7th highest paid player on the Ravens, but the 255th highest paid player in the NFL.
Right. Which I think $5 million for an elite specialist, that's totally fine. Yeah. We're already paying close to that for Watt, who's also technically a specialist at this point for what he does.
Yeah.
So I think that's totally fine.
For some reason, I thought you meant TJ, and I was like, wait, what?
No, Derek. We know Derek's basically a special team at this point, which is fine. But yeah. So I think it's probably going to be 3-4 years, 15-20-ish million, if I had to guess, close to that. If not, maybe a little less because he's not the highest paid kicker probably, but we'll see.
Yeah. And then some of the other notes I wanted to touch on. So we'll stick with the specialists for now. But apparently, Presley Harvin.
Presley Harvin.
Yeah, exactly. Presley Harvin is coming to this camp, and he's looked a lot more consistent than he was during most of the season. Obviously, the end of the year was tough for him just because he had a lot of personal family issues, and then he missed some games. So, but I think that on top of being a rookie in the NFL. Punting a ton for an offense that was awful.
That didn't help.
Just kind of a lot of bad external factors for him that, you hope this year it could be like, all right, things have calmed down a little bit now. I think there's I don't think there's really a great reason right now for like the team to try to move on from him. I think they have like some kind of reserve punter in the building just in case,
Yeah.
but I think it's very fair that he gets another shot this year, and I expect him to, obviously improve on last year.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like last year went about as poorly as it could from both a playing standpoint and also a circumstance standpoint, right? Like, you can't really expect guys to always play through the stuff that he was dealing with personally, and especially, and he was asked to kick way more than you hope any punter has to, but especially not a rookie who has other things going on. So yeah, I'm expecting a pretty sizable improvement if he can just be a average or above average, punter for us on a season where we're hoping not to punt nearly as much.
Yeah.
That should be totally fine. I think he'll at least return value then as the 7th round pick. So
yeah, and I think that's the problem, is like that was kind of the idea with when Jordan Berry was the punter, who was just perfectly average, would shank one in like, maybe not even like once a game, like it'd be like once every 4 games, and then kind of struggle at the end of the year, whereas Harvin was having like 1 or 2 shanks a week, which was a major issue.
Yeah, that was tough to see. I mean, he got into a few, and you'd see what he can do when he hits one good, but it just wasn't consistent enough. So
correct me if I'm wrong, but did he punt the playoff game against the Chiefs?
I believe so.
Was he really? He was like really good for some reason.
I do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did do that, because I remember we were talking about whether they should let the punter they brought in. I can't remember. Yeah, Waitman. Yeah, whether they should let him punt because he was great to end the year. But they think they gave it to Harvin, and he did pretty well in that game.
Which was I think we talked about how like that was great for him to kind of end the year on a positive note in terms of on the field. So that's good to see. Other news and notes. Apparently, George Pickens was like the star of minicamp. Just
not surprising.
Looking like it. I mean, and that's the thing is like when he is fully healthy, like he's an absolute freak athlete. Like this is kind of like, all right, we're gonna try to do the Martavis Bryant thing again. Just have this absolute freak of nature who can do anything as a receiver.
Yeah, I think the thing with Pickens too is like he is built for this environment because he is just such a physical specimen. He's a very unique type of player in the sense that, again, he's a big body guy without being super heavy, so he's very lean. He's very easy moving. Like he has more speed than I think people really think he probably does.
Yeah,
and his ability to release at the line too. Like when I went back and watched more of him, like that release that he gets off of press especially gives him like an extra step on guys that other guys might not have. So even if he's not a 4-3 guy, he kind of almost plays like it whenever he gets that release off the line. So
yeah, it's just such a perfect storm because, like you said, like that refined of a release combined with his length, and again, maybe not like 4-3 speed, but you combine the length with the 4-4 speed or whatever, and that's just like not many players in college for sure, and then there will be some more in the NFL that can keep up with him. But I think he's gonna have a really big season, and he'll be fun to watch.
I'd like to think so. Yeah.
And then of course the story that's going to be really the theme of the entire offseason is that the QB battle, it seems, was pretty even throughout camp. I think most other stuff I saw said Mitch Trubisky was a winner. I think some kind of took it as a binary and then dubbed Kenny Pickett the quote loser, which I'm not sure is fair. And then even some said Mason Rudolph was a winner because he looked good too. So I think that it's really as even, and even with like Mason Rudolph like being in contention in terms of just like how their play was, everybody's at the same level, which is pretty. I think it's good, honestly, at this point.
Yeah, I think at this point you just want to see everybody not have trouble having information and actually using it on the field, right? You want them to be able to run things smoothly. You want to be able to go from play to play without hiccups or major issues of like knowing where guys are supposed to be. If all those guys are doing that, that at least means that all 3 of them should be capable of running the offense, right? Because that's really what this is going to be about, especially when it comes to Pickett and Trubisky. If both of them have equal-ish knowledge of the playbook and are both able to run everything properly, they're probably going to go to Trubisky because he has more of a veteran, presence there.
Yes.
Opposed to like where Pickett is probably going to have to legitimately beat him out, opposed to just be the same level as him, just because they know what they're going to get, at least with a guy who has more experience a little bit.
Yeah, and that's something that we've talked about. Is like the Steelers definitely like value that competition, and they will play the rookie if he is better.
Yes.
You talk about guys like Ryan Shazier. But if there's a veteran at the position and it's like you said, it's even, then the veteran gets deference just because they like to respect veterans that way. And I think that with all the comments Mike Tomlin made about getting a mobile quarterback last year, Pickett is mobile, but I think Trubisky is definitely a better athlete.
Overall, yeah, I'd say.
I think he's better able to marry his mobility and athletic ability to playing in structure, whereas Pickett's is a lot more about like kind of creating out of structure, which granted, the Steelers survived on that for a long time with Ben Roethlisberger. But I think at this point they want to be more in structure.
For sure. And I think that's where, like, if Mitch can show that he can run this offense with the same level of precision as Pickett's able to show, or better, preferably, obviously, then I don't see them moving to Pickett unless, like I said, the season kind of falls apart, or it's just Mitch isn't getting it done and they want to add some spark to the offense, whatever the case may be. But in general, I think Pickett's going to have to legitimately beat him out pretty easily for him to get the nod to start the season.
All right. So the one thing I want to talk about before we get into the offensive preview is this article that came from PFF. and it's, PFF obviously has its detractors and has a reputation at this point.
Yeah.
And this article, like this article got clickbaited, headline grabbed, to hell, basically. Like everybody picked it up and it made a huge deal of it because the rankings put Tomlin 13th and behind such illustrious names as Cliff Kingsbury, who is ranked 4th. Kyle Shanahan was ranked 7th, which I think Kyle Shanahan's a very good offensive mind and probably a decent head coach, but that seems a little high given his win-loss record. And Mike McCarthy, and even first-year coach like Brandon Staley, which is pretty crazy.
So, we talked about this a little bit pre-show just so we could kind of hash it out a little bit. But my biggest issue with it overall, right, is, again, you talked about it. This guy does have kind of like a statistical process he used to kind of come to this conclusion, a formula that he used to do this. And, maybe it's something to do with the formula or whatever the case may be. But especially when it comes to coaching, right? Like there's a lot of really valuable metrics and different things you can use to help evaluate players and how they played in certain situations, all that stuff. It's a lot harder to put a true number or numerical value on a coach, right? There's so many factors that fans just do not literally get to see. And even people like PFF do not get to see, right, behind closed doors, whatever the case may be. The things that actually make them the coach that they are hard to just know just from watching the product on the field, right? And in case of a guy like Tomlin, him being ranked 13th among current coaches is we both can say is ridiculous to a certain degree. But it's also the guys in front of him, like you mentioned, like Kingsbury. I'm not going to say that he's like a bad coach, but I honestly think that it won't be very long that he's not that before they move on from him personally. Like I just don't think he brings enough things outside of his offensive prowess. Whereas, with Tomlin, like the defense obviously is a big thing for him, but it's more about his ability to lead, right? To be a leader, a teacher, a true coach among coaches, right? McCarthy, especially too. I wanted to take a second to talk about this. They've coached for similar lengths of time.
Say Mike McCarthy did beat him in a Super Bowl.
Yeah, he did. Right. Then again, that was the true coming of age of Aaron Rodgers' time, and that team was on fire. And there's a lot of mistakes made by certain players in that Super Bowl. But yeah, he does have that over him essentially. But they're both Super Bowl winning head coaches. Both had Hall of Fame quarterbacks. But we've seen where with McCarthy, things kind of fell off the rails with his quarterback that was supposed to make him as good of a coach as he was. And in Dallas so far, despite success last year, his flaws, there's several of them, have shown up the same that they used to in the past. He has not progressed, I don't think, as a coach as he's gotten older.
Right. So I want to explain this model a little bit because so like I said, like this article in PFF kind of played into it. It does a great job of just kind of taking away the context and just trying to get clicks, which that's why we're here. Right. But the point of this article, and even the chart where this comes from says it, is how many wins would each NFL coach have with an average roster?
Right.
And the variables that are taken into account are, sorry, I'm trying to find it now. It's a multi-level model where the fixed effects are the salaries of each starter on both sides of the ball, including an indicator if the player is a rookie, and the target is points scored or allowed in a season. So there's a lot of variables that go into this model, and then it uses Pythagorean win expectations to determine that expected number of wins, essentially. And that is basically what the entire ranking system is based on.
Yeah.
Which, I think even the author Connor McQuiston, who's an intern for PFF, like he said, like there's outliers here, and like he explains them, says like Cliff, the model underestimates Kyler's talent, doesn't think highly of Arizona's offensive talent. Tomlin doesn't think highly of the offensive output, considering Roethlisberger. Which, if you think about it, like there's really only been like 2 seasons since 2011, which is what this model goes into, where the Steelers offense like went the whole year and was really good the whole year. And I would say that was
Yeah.
probably 2014 and 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or 2017.
It would have been 2017. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that that's relatively fair. And I think you can quibble with the, how this model is constructed and why constructed in the first place. But I like this upon reading it more because I was like, most head coach rankings we see are just based on people's vibes. Like, how much do you like this head coach or dislike this one?
Yeah.
And like you said, like, there's all these variables that people don't know. So, like, what's the point of me just like saying, like, okay, here's the coaches I like the best? I think that this is good because it's like this is a unique thing that you see. And the guy says, like, all right, here's my rationale. It's not, I'm not ranking these like my model that I created to try to explain this, and this is what it spits out. Yeah. So like it's not like his opinion. It's just like, all right, like this is how I'm measuring certain things. And I think he would admit, like, and this is like the biggest part of analytics and statistical analysis is you're never going to get probably, especially in this kind of thing, like a correct answer, but you're trying to approach something that looks, the most realistic. So I think even he would admit, and he actually got invited on Good Morning Football, which I didn't watch the appearance, but I might go back and try to find it. But he might say, like, I disagree with some of these findings, but this is like, it's like if you're doing any like scientific theory, like this was my hypothesis. I was like the data. I'm surprised by the results. So,
right.
I disagree with some of the findings, but it is what it is. So I respect it because it's actually something interesting and unique.
Yeah. Like it's more so for me, like the fact that it got these results. Again, when you're trying to create something that does this, right, to spit out results like this, I think when you're doing it for players or other things, you're probably going to get a more balanced result than you will with coaching or other things because it's just hard to do. So like, I'm not even like this guy, like obviously this is what his process got him to, not necessarily what his personal thoughts are on the matter. So I would say that in general, this is an endeavor that obviously is cool to take on, but probably a bit flawed to try to make a process like this, in my opinion, at least right now.
It's probably just flawed because of a lack of data inputs, just like you said, for coaching, because there's just not that many quantitative things you can do. So
right, because it's great to say, like you said, based on what it's trying to use to make this determination, that's fine, but that's more subjective than I think even the people at PFF want to think that it is.
Yes, and I mean, if there's one thing PFF does, it turns subjective things into, well, I'll say it turns qualitative things into quantitative things.
Yes, right, for sure.
All right, let's get into our main topic now. So we're going to dive into the Steelers' offensive numbers from the last few years, and we're not necessarily going to do like yards and all that stuff just from last few years because there's a lot that goes into that.
We're more tendencies than
thank you, tendencies. So the first one, and this is obviously the most important, probably, is the run-pass splits. So, So I looked these up, and this is mostly from Sharp Football Stats, which is run by Warren Sharp, who does a really good job compiling a lot of these numbers.
Yes.
So this has the run-pass splits for the last 6 seasons. So from 2016 on, and so I'll go backwards in time. So in 2021, and I'll do run-pass in that order. So 37% run, 63% pass. In 2020, 35%, 65%. 2019, 42%, 58%. 2018, 33%, 67%, 2017, 40%, 60%, and 2016, 41%, 59%. So essentially, I think you've got kind of two outliers in the middle. You've got 2019 where Ben is hurt and they run the ball a good bit more, and 2018 where they couldn't really run the ball anyways and they just passed all the time. I think.
Yeah.
And I put the rankings next to it. So, and this is pretty crazy. If you look at the pass rank, if you're going by just the raw number of plays, every year in that range, except 2019, the Steelers were in the top 5 for most passes thrown. In terms of the rate, in terms of that percentage, in 2021, they had the second highest pass rate, 2020, second highest pass rate, 2019, 23rd highest, 2018, second highest, 2017, 11th highest, and 2016, 20th highest. So, the last few years, you can just see how Ben kind of took this offense over and just made it super air raid pass heavy.
Yeah. And like, obviously this is not ideal for any offense. Like ideally, if you're this much of a spread between run and pass, even in today's game, right, you don't want to be top 3 in one and bottom 3 in another, right? You don't want to be in that mode because that tells you that either you cannot do one or the other or that you're unwilling to.
Yeah.
And that whenever you have that much of a disparity, defenses know that and they can game plan that much easier than you like them to.
Yeah, and and I think the converse is like you think about a team like the Ravens, who for the last few years have been
Right.
super run heavy in terms of these percentages, and that's a little different because they're essentially kind of running a different offense than everybody. And
Yeah,
I
it's
think
very unique.
even if you want to argue that Lamar struggles to throw from the pocket, like they still are throwing the ball a decent bit and can throw it effectively, I would say.
Right, like there's a difference between playing to your strength because it's
Mhm.
specifically working for you and
Yeah.
doing something because you have to, right?
Yes.
Where the Ravens have built an offense that's capable of running the ball 60+% of the time when they
Yeah.
want to, and it works. But they're able to, and they're not unwilling to if the situation comes up. When we saw the Colts game last year, where Lamar threw like 50 some passes
Mhm.
and brought them back, like they're capable of doing that with him and running the ball only a little bit if they can't get anything going.
Mhm.
But it's another thing to where what we've seen with the Steelers, where this is happening primarily because they felt like they had no other choice. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of the boat we've been in, unfortunately.
Yeah. I find the 2016 year really interesting because they were kind of in the middle for both, but if
Mhm.
you looked at just the raw numbers, they threw the third most passes and had the fourth most running plays. So the offense was just
Yeah,
on the field so
a
much.
ton. We were on the offense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that year was some. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So
and so we'll get into it a little later, but in terms of projecting 2022, but so the run pass splits we're looking for the last few years, it's been about 65 to 35 and kind of vacillating between those with a few
right.
minor exceptions. So we'll dive into personnel group frequency. And I think this is where we're going to see the most radical change, but we'll
Yes.
get into it a little later. But in 2021, the Steelers, so with personnel group frequency, I'll just explain it for anybody who doesn't know. So
Mhm.
in the NFL or in football in general, most offensive formation or personnel groups are defined by a 2-digit numbering system where the first number denotes the number of running backs, the second digit denotes the number of tight ends. So 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, and then
Right.
by extension, 3 receivers.
Mhm.
So if, for example, 2021, the Steelers were in 11 personnel 75% of the time, and they were in 12 personnel 16% of the time, and in no other personnel group more than 3% of the time. So
Right.
very basic in terms of personnel usage.
Yes. Yeah.
In 2020, similar story, 75% in 11 personnel, 12% in 12 personnel, 5% in 22 personnel, and 0-1 personnel, which is no running backs and 1 tight end.
Yep.
In 2019, again, weird year, you've got 70% 11 personnel, 20% 12 personnel, and 4% and 21 personnel. And I have to imagine that 12 personnel number at 20% is so high because they're counting the extra tight end plays.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that again, I most from 2019 just mostly throw that out because it's just not useful.
That year was interesting. Yeah.
And then
So
2018 is pretty interesting because you've got 69% 11 personnel, which is obviously that's really what most NFL offenses are running these days. So
roughly, yeah.
that's pretty normal. But you have 9% 12 personnel, 6% 22 personnel, 6% 0-1 personnel, and then you've got a few smatterings of 21, 0-0, and 13 at 3, 3, and 2, respectively. So then they're kind of diversifying the groups a little bit.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a weird year with personnel, anyways. But I think this year you're going to see a massive uptick in usage of 12 personnel.
Yeah, from what we've heard and what we just kind of know about what Canada hopes to do with this offense and who he has to work with,
Mm-hmm.
it feels like they're going to move into that realm a lot more because it's going to not only benefit the quarterbacks, but just the skill players that we have on offense right now.
And that's just all when Matt Canada's wherever he's been, really, like, it has mostly been a 12 personnel heavy offense. That's just kind of what he wants to do. So I think you're going to see that go. And so at OTA's minicamp, he discussed Zach Gentry as a starter.
Yes,
which
that's
he would be the number 2 tight end in these personnel groups. And obviously we've talked a lot about Cam Hayward being that number 3 tight end and not a fullback, which that's what he did most of his last year at Michigan State. Again, he's not built like a normal tight end, but he can do a lot of kind of funky stuff that tight ends do more so than fullbacks.
Yeah, he's that H-back instead of the true, like, he's not a true tight end. He's not a true running back. He's not a true fullback. He's kind of that movable piece that you hope you can do a couple different things with.
Yeah, and I think I can imagine seeing him in a lot of pre-snap motion and like motion at the snap, almost more so than even like the number of jet sweeps that Matt Canada loves to run.
Yeah, because if you get him on the move as a blocker too, he's much more effective in that role than a true downhill fullback role. get him on the edge of the offense and allow him to kick guys out like corners and safeties that come up, stuff like that.
Yeah, and you're never going to see him on the line of scrimmage like a Heath Miller or a Matt Spade.
No,
like that's never going to happen.
That's just not what he does.
Unless like everybody else is hurt, and even then it's like
right,
it's a mistake. Just figure something else out.
You just got to bring someone else in, whatever else. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I have some little bit of predictions for these later on, but we'll get into that later. Yeah. So this next one is really interesting, and unfortunately for some reason the database is not updated for 2021.
Yeah,
but I have to imagine that the numbers are pretty similar to 2020.
I would think so. Yeah.
So this is the under center run versus pass split. So essentially, when a team is under center, how much are they running? How much are they passing? And then vice versa in the shotgun. And for explanation purposes, the pistol formation, which the Steelers aren't huge on, but a little bit, that's coded as shotgun for this kind of data. So like I said, there's no 2021 numbers. We have the 2020 numbers. So overall, the Steelers were in shotgun 82% of the time and under center only 18% of the time. And their disparity for running the ball in 2020 and 2019 for under center run versus pass ratio was the worst in the NFL. So in 2020, when they were under center, they ran the ball 86% of the time and passed the ball 14% of the time. And in 2019, when they were under center, they ran the ball 80% of the time and passed the ball 20% of the time. So essentially just giving away what the play is.
And that's kind of what the root of all this is, right? And this is where the problems with these numbers, we're spitting out a bunch of numbers, but what this is really saying and what the problem with this is that offenses or defenses have been able to key on what we're doing for the past 2 years with remarkable efficiency.
Yeah.
They've been able to tell basically by the alignment and who's on the field, what type of play at the very least, and oftentimes what honestly the play is going to be in some cases for the last 2 years. And a lot of that is the fact that, Ben has obviously was limited those 2 years, and, whatever else the case may be, the offensive line not being as good, so that you have to rely on certain plays. But this is something that defenses can look at and coaching staffs can look at and go, hey, we can key on this. This is something that we can use to our advantage, and you do not want to have that.
Yeah, and I think you could argue this is what kind of led to the bottom falling out of the offense in 2020, especially because it was so telling just what they were going to do even before the snap.
Right.
In terms of, and so going back a few more years, it's relatively similar for running the ball. In 2018, it's a 74-26 run pass split for under center. In 2017, it's 77-23, and those were both that was the third highest run rate under center. In 2016, they were a little better, 73% run, 27% pass when under center. And then for passing the ball, for shotgun, the run pass rates, it's about 80-20 to 75-25. And those are a little better towards the middle.
Right.
In 2019, when they had the bad offense, they were 70% in shotgun. They were 70% pass, 30% run, which the run was 7th in the NFL. So when they couldn't throw the ball at all, they were just running it even from shotgun. Yeah. But yeah, I find this interesting, and I wish they did have the 2021 stats, but I have to imagine they were pretty similar.
I have to assume it's got to be at least. I'd be surprised if we were under center more than 20% of the time.
Yeah, I think the under center was definitely telling because they just didn't want to do play action out of that, and also I think they ran the ball a little more this season just because they knew Ben couldn't throw. All right, so now we'll get into the rushing types, and this data is actually from PFF. So it's mostly graded correctly, I think. So this is also from 2016 through 2021 when they started blending. This is run type, so it's zone versus gap.
Right.
And so from 2016 through 2020, the Steelers were primarily a gap running style team. Yes. And you see that the gap percentages vary a bit. They go between 47 and 55%. And then zone is anywhere between 29% and 38%.
Yeah.
But gap dominated their runs every one of those years. So, and that you see that with the type of offensive line they had, David DeCastro and Ron Foster, it all makes sense.
Yes.
But then in 2021, and also this was the year they got back to running the ball just a lot more, their most rushes since 2017.
Yes.
It completely flips. You've got 425 total rushes, 220 of them are zone, that's almost 52%, and then 138 gap rushes, which is only 32.5%. And if we know anything about Matt Canada, again, like the dude loves wide zone running.
He does.
you're just going to see a lot more of that in 2021 when he is more in charge, or 2022 when he's in charge and Ben isn't there.
Yeah, I expect that disparity to stay at least the same, if not even go up, honestly.
Yeah.
And especially the guys they brought in to
Mm-hmm.
this offensive line fit that as well, obviously. That was kind of part of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to be surprised if we get upwards of maybe like 55-ish, if not more percent of the runs be zone.
Yeah, and this is something we talked about a lot in the offseason is that, we don't even necessarily need this offense to be great.
No.
I think we just want this offense to have an identity, and this is something else I heard, I talked about, if you can't be good, be weird, or stick to something. And I think honestly with Ben out of the picture, they're going to be able to be all right, this is what we're doing. And I guess they had an identity with Ben, but it's hard to even, because it was just such a
it wasn't really an identity. It was you're forcing a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing.
They had an identity. It was just the wrong personnel and the wrong time for it. And I think now you have better of both of those things.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that ultimately, and we've talked about this before, they need to be at the very least functional, right? Because this offense last year was very far from functional.
Yes.
They had very few moments of true, oh man, we can do this consistently and do it well. It just did not happen very much. And I don't expect that to be the same this year. I think that they're going to find something, whether it's leaning on the run game with Harris and specifically the zone rush game with the new offensive lineman they brought in, whether it's, play action. Hopefully I'm expecting more of that with Trubisky or Pickett, one of the two, whatever the case may be. They need to find something that everyone's on the same page with. Everybody is able to do well, just figures everything out on every play, and stick with that to a certain degree so they have something they can lean their hat on.
Yeah. I think this kind of flip in style is interesting, and it's with regards to Najee Harris, in that I think coming out, not a lot of people thought of him as an outside zone running back because he's just so big. You typically want guys that more like Anthony McFarland, who again is a Matt Canada disciple, I guess.
Yeah,
but it still works. It kind of works in the same way that it works for Derrick Henry, just in that you give him you kind of gave him more of an opportunity to get going. And Najee Harris, I would say, he even has talked about I need to get better with my vision, which I think comes with experience. And I think that having this style of an offense where, first of all, ideally the defense will be backing off a little bit, so he doesn't have to face as many loaded boxes as he did last year. And so that should just help him by default.
I think the thing too with Harris is that as big of a player as he is, he's still a player that thrives on his quickness.
Yes,
right?
He's so
this is not a guy that is a lumbering back. And even with Henry, I don't think people think about this as much as they probably should. And it's just because it doesn't make sense on the surface. You think this isn't the case. Henry is not a traditionally good power running back. He does not do in the sense of throw him downhill, on a dive play and let him get 3, 4, 5. He doesn't get up to speed fast enough, right? That's why the wide zone is so perfect for him, is because when it's blocked well and he has the ability to get up to speed, then he's unstoppable because he's a billion feet tall and 100 and 500 pounds. It feels like when you're trying to tackle him, because of that speed and movement that he gets up to. Whereas Harris has the quickness to make that work, right? Once he gets north and south on a cut, once he finds somewhere to go, then he's a danger, right? As a power runner and as the ability to make people miss. So I don't think it's a perfect fit, obviously, for him, just because he is. I think he is also great at the power running game opposed to Henry, but it's not like it's going to limit him in any way, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so now I think I'm going to try to get into a little bit of prediction with what
always
I think
fun.
these
always fun.
What I think this offense is going to look like next year. So what I did essentially is I kind of looked at the last few years of their play types called, and I kind of tried to predict out, what we're going to see this year. So for pretty much the last few years, the Steelers' number of plays have been going up, and they took obviously a big leap last year because they added the 17th game. But I think this year you're actually going to see it go down a little bit, and I think that's because they're going to try to control the clock a little more. I think there will be less drives, but the drives will be longer, obviously, because ideally the offense is going to be more efficient than it was last year.
Right.
But I think you're going to see a decrease in plays because they are going to try to run the ball more. And so I see them running essentially about 1,100 plays, which comes out to about 65 plays per game, which I think would actually be kind of below average for the NFL at this point.
Yeah, I would say years ago, a little bit different, but now especially. Yeah, that would be a little bit below average. And I think you're right about the premise, right? If we don't run less plays than we did last year, that's probably a bad sign.
Yeah.
Like I think it's not a good thing if we run more plays than we did last year because of the disparity of run to pass and everything that goes with that. So I'm hoping that you're right on with that plays per game.
Because now you're seeing teams like run 80 plays a game pretty consistently.
So some situations,
I don't know exactly what the average is, but it's I'll see if I can try to pull it up. But
I want to say it's 70 something. I want to say it's close to like 70 something, maybe somewhere in the middle of 70.
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of play around with Football Reference now, so we'll see if I can find something quickly. Points. Here we go. Plays. So last year, the average number of plays was actually 1076.
Okay.
So, and I see like a lot of like the bad teams obviously ran a lot less plays. But I'm looking at this now. Like, so the Carolina Panthers ran 1,106 plays last year. Steelers actually ran 1113. So it's essentially staying the same. But again, we're seeing every year, every team is running more plays essentially, unless they do a major philosophical change. But so I see that kind of staying constant as opposed to continuing to increase.
Right, and the type of plays we're going to see is going to change significantly, I think, too, on top of that. So,
and I think that ideally there will be times where this team actually has like a decent lead at the end of a game, and they're trying to like chew the clock, as opposed to last year where they were like trying to score at the end of games because it was so close and they had to do something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you think about like the Vikings or the Chargers games where they were just all running tons of plays. So so I think you're going to see that. That could be another contributing factor. Right. In terms of how those plays are getting broken down, this is more of a hope, I would say, than a prediction.
Right. Well, there's going to be a lot of hoping for this team. So.
I'm hoping for a like 57 to 40.
43?
Yeah, 43. Yep. 57 to 43 pass run split. Because I don't think this team is going to flip those numbers. Like pretty much every team, with usually the exception of like the Ravens or one team, is going pass over run. But getting that under 60-40, that's going to get you like to one of the most balanced in terms of close to 50-50 in the NFL. Like you'll be in the top 5 most balanced offenses in the league.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I'm honestly hoping for 60-40. That's kind of my baseline. Yeah. Just because, like, if they hit 60-40, that means it probably was because it went well, them trying to get to that. Like, anything more than that is probably also great, obviously. But if they can hit that true, like, 60-40 split, I'm happy with that.
That's honestly, like, I think Canada is going to be aiming for 55-45.
I think it's what he wants to do for sure. Yeah. Like, just knowing enough about him, not only just his background, but what it looks like his plans are for this offense this year. Yeah. I'm sure that's what he wants to do. It's just going to be, can he do it based on game script and stuff like that.
So that equates out to essentially you're looking at 37 passes a game and 28 rushes per game.
Right.
Which I think that's pretty close. I think that's what you want. You don't want to be throwing more than 40. And there's all those like dumb stats that's like, oh, if you rush the ball X amount of times for X amount of yards, teams are undefeated. It's like, that's not how this works.
That's one of those statistics and one of those things. It's like every time I see it, I'm like, everyone who's posting them, I'm like, I think at this point, right? Like what this means, like what this actually says.
Here's the thing: is like, it's always usually like the pregame shows, like the NFL Fox, the NFL Day or whatever, and like they know that like dads across America, granddads across America, like watching them before the games, like see running the ball, you win the game.
Oh, I know why. I know why they do it. Mitch,
yeah,
right. But like the fact that even those people have not caught on to the point of like. Yeah. Wow, I wonder why the team that ran the ball more won the game usually.
Yeah.
It can't be because they were winning and they didn't want to throw the ball because they didn't want to have an interception.
My favorite one of these things is like people always say this about like I think it's like Zeke and like the Cowboys is like when Zeke gets and so then people are like, all right, just give him the first 25 plays of the game, just hand off and then
right. And I'm like, I would love if McCarthy did that.
If somebody that'd be so funny.
I would do it honestly because like especially like if it's a season, especially the end of the season, right? Like either you don't need any more wins at this point, like it's the last game of the season or whatever the case may be. Just all the weird cliches of football. Let's just try them out, see what happens.
Yeah,
right.
Just like, abide by them fully. Yeah,
awesome. It'd be so ridiculous, but it'd be fun. Yeah.
So with the so the rushing plays I equated, it's about 475 rushes for the team on the season. So I think that equates essentially to about 250 zone rushes, 150 gap rushes, 40 jet sweeps, and then
miscellaneous whatever
QB sneak, fullback dive, reverses, whatever. And so that's a little above 50% in the zone, a little, I think, around 35% for gap rushes, most of which I imagine will be Benny Snell.
Yeah, when he does get on the field, it's
Yeah.
going to be, it better be gap rushes. Let me
Yeah.
put that.
Yeah.
Maybe not all of them, but most of them.
Yeah. And then 40 jet sweeps, and I think that might be conservative. Honestly, there could be more.
Yeah, I really just think it depends. Like Calvin
That's
Austin,
about like
what's
two. That's
his
about two
usage?
jet sweep handoffs per game, and then some
Yeah,
change.
that's fine.
Might be 3.
Yeah.
Might end up being 3.
It'd probably be 3, but
yeah. And then passing plays, it's about 630, and again 37 passes per game. Again, I would love that to be an even 35, but that's the state of the league today. So it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
In terms of the under center shotgun splits, I would hope to see the run pass splits for either of them get to like 65-30, or sorry, just for shotgun versus under center. I want to see like 65% shotgun, 35% under center, because again, in the league today, shotgun is the majority regardless. But I think it would be nice if this team could be one of the teams that is, in the top 5 for under center snaps taken. And then I think for running the ball and passing the ball, you want to see about closer to the 70-30% as opposed to like the 80-20 that was the Roethlisberger era.
Yeah, and I feel like that's actually very likely. I feel like because they're gonna want to run some traditional play action, more than they have in a while. And I think that when you do go under center, they're going to be able to threaten that a lot more than they have in the past. So that it should allow them to pass a little bit more in those situations than they have in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we talked about like the tendencies were just so obvious with this team in the last few years that they just became so easy to game plan for. So in terms of personnel usage, I think that the Steelers will definitely be top 10 in 12 personnel usage in 2020. And that's mostly just because there are other teams that are also super married to that grouping. So like the Vikings are, the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins were actually majority. The Dolphins and Vikings were like majority 12 personnel last year.
Yes, they really liked having that.
Yeah. And then the Titans and the 49ers use it a ton as well.
I'm assuming the Patriots
Browns,
should as well. I'm assuming
Patriots, yes. Browns, Patriots definitely use it a ton as well. So it's just tough to crack that top 10 these days. But I have it now as 50% 11 personnel because, again, that's just
it's still the major thing for most teams.
You are going to have you're going to have like the two Deontay and Chase Claypool as the guys, and then like you're obviously going to want to get Pickens and even Austin on the field for snaps. So like that makes sense. But then I have it as 35% 12 personnel, which I'll pull the stats up now, but that would definitely be top 10 last year.
Last year, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's going to be Gentry. And then I think they're going to get a lot higher into 13 personnel, which is something they used to do a lot more. Mostly when they had like Vance McDonald and Jesse James.
Yes.
So they could have that type of guys. Let's see. Okay. 2021. Let's see. I'm going to sort. Come on. There we go. Okay, so Miami ran 12 personnel 61% of the time.
Yeah, they were pretty.
And they're the only team over 50. And then the next highest was Green Bay at 29%. So that would put the Steelers in rare category. And I really, those comments about Gentry being a starter makes me think that this team is going to be in 12 personnel a ton.
I think they at least want to be, right? Yes. I think it's going to come down to, like, obviously it has to be successful. It has to work whenever they're running it in camp and everything else as they get ready for the season, and we'll see how much they use it to start the season. Yeah. But I'd be surprised if they weren't at least at this range, like to start the year, especially as they try to get things going.
I think we'll also see a good bit of 22 and 21 personnel. And I think you'll see Derek Watt out there, but I also think that you might see like, it'll be like a 12 or 13 personnel grouping with Hayward out there, then he'll like motion to being a fullback.
Yes.
So he's going to blur that line a little bit, which I think is fine.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, 13 personnel, 12%, and then a smattering of other ones. I really don't expect this team to come out with any like 0 tight end sets, just because Freiermuth is a really good player.
Yeah.
And they're going to want to have at least present the idea of running the ball a lot.
Yeah. Even if they wanted to go like 5 wide, Freiermuth's probably going to be on the field.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's going to be some form of a tight end on the field.
And then again, like you're probably also going to want to have Harris out there on the field because he can split out wide.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Very few 0-0 or 10 personnel kind of things, and then a smattering of goal line packages with.
Right, obviously. Yeah.
I have player stats, but those are obviously so.
Yeah, you're just plugging in like
the
play types.
You're kind of trying to figure. Yeah, you're kind of guessing at that. So, I think this is going to be like one of the most run-heavy Steelers teams that we've seen like since 2007.
Yeah, I would say probably since the turn of was really in the last 10 years minimum. I would say for sure. I'd be surprised if they weren't.
Yeah, and probably the most 12 personnel usage they've had, like since they had James McDonald, and before then, I guess like when Miller and Spaeth were there,
Yeah,
like
we're
they used,
together. Yeah.
yeah. So I think this is gonna be like the most. I think this is probably the biggest change in the offense you're gonna see since they brought in Todd Haley for the first time.
Yeah, and that's what I think is interesting is like if for no other reason, like Canada has to reinvent this offense from what it was last year, right? What exactly it's going to end up looking like by the end of the season is going to be determined by the quarterback play and like what guys stand out on offense, obviously. But in general, like if it doesn't look significantly different from last year, then something went very wrong. Let me put it that way.
Honestly, my biggest concern about this is I foresee a situation relatively similar to 2020 happening where it works pretty well for the first 12 weeks or so, and then the last 6 weeks he kind of runs out of ideas.
That's kind of my concern with Canada in general, right? Like
Yeah.
as much as like I understand the idea of wanting to see what he can do with a better core around him and not having to deal with Ben's situation and his lack of being able to do much of anything other than shotgun plays. But at the same time, I don't know how good of a coach he actually is capable of being on the offense. Like we really don't know.
And he might test me on this, but there are only so many ways you can run a jet sweep.
Yes, I mean,
He's going to find them all, but there are only so many.
He will use all the ways that I think he could possibly think of. But yeah, it's again, I'm hoping because I don't want to feel down on the offense because I'm very excited about a lot of the stuff that they've done as far as additions to the team and actually adding guys to offensive line to a certain degree. But I'm going to be pessimistic until I'm kind of proven otherwise, and like it's hard.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the schedule because maybe that. I mean, I think they play the Bengals week 1.
Right.
That's tough. Patriots week 2. That'll be tough just because their defense is down, especially his pass defense. But they'll still be good in the front 7.
Yeah.
At the Browns, versus
depends
Jets,
on who's playing in that game and who's not. Yeah. So
I mean, they've got a lot of good defenses.
In
the first before they have 8 games before the bye, and all of them
are pretty
at least
tough,
pretty decent. Like they've got the Buccaneers week 6. That's gonna be incredibly tough. They're so good against the run. Eagles gonna be really tough now. They have Jordan Davis and the other guys they have. Saints, Bengals again. Colts might be a little easier because they're so predictable now with Gus Bradley. Falcons, there you go. I mean, their first defense that I'm like, I feel really confident about their ability to attack this defense is week 13 against the Falcons.
Yeah, and even then, like the Falcons would probably be better at least.
They can't be worse.
Defense should be better.
They can't be worse. Yeah.
Like it's just so I think, and then we talked about this before when we were kind of talking about the schedule or when it came out. Like I think we're really going to know what type of team this is over the first 8 weeks, right? If they are 500-ish or 3-5, 4-4, I think that they have a decent shot of being successful for the season, right?
Yeah,
because that back half is not nearly as difficult overall as the front.
Yeah,
half.
You gotta really just survive.
Yeah, and this is a team that's known to do this stuff of just like hanging around whenever you shouldn't hang around. We did it last year. So if they can do that in the first half of the year, they could actually legitimately have a chance, especially if the offense figures it out by that time, to have a good start or have a good end of the season at that point.
Yeah, the bye is placed very well strategically for them. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about.
we know we'll find.
We usually say that, and then something big happens. So
of course,
hopefully it's in a positive way. Maybe they sign a backup running back that's serviceable,
right? Or somehow Minka gets done early, which I doubt. But
they signed the Minka deal. But in the meantime, Shane, let the people know where they can find you and your work.
Find me at Shane Kubis on Twitter, like always, and at SteelersATB on Twitter, and just follow us right around the block on all of our multiple platforms that we're on.
Yep, you can follow me at Mitchell T. Wolf, WOLFE on Twitter. Like Shane said, make sure you're following Around the Block on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, everywhere you can find it. Thank you for tuning in. We hope to have you back next time.